The next general manager of the Jets will have some very important jobs that are kind of flying under the radar right now. Let's talk about the top orders of business for any new Jets general manager today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, January 10th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, of course, the Jets are still in their search for a new general manager along with a new head coach. On today's show, we're going to talk about some very important jobs that the next New York Jets general manager has as soon as they take the job. There's a lot of talk about building this team in the long run, which is obviously very important. There's a lot of talk about what the next Jets general manager will do in the upcoming NFL draft. Obviously very important. Even to a lesser extent, there's talk about how will this Jets general manager fill immediate holes. Again, this is important. But there are a couple of important tasks in front of the new general manager that really aren't drawing as much attention. And I'd like to begin by talking about just dealing with internal affairs, because there are a number of key players the Jets are going to have to make decisions on sooner rather than later. Now, there are three players this offseason the Jets need to decide whether or not they will pick up the fifth-year option. And if you're not familiar with the way NFL rookie contracts work, first-round picks receive 4-year contracts with a team option for the fifth year. And the team needs to decide whether to exercise that option between the player's third and fourth NFL seasons. And because the Jets drafted 3 players in the first round in 2022, they have 3 players on whom they need to decide this option. And those 3 players are Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, and Jermaine Johnson. And I think it's clear that barring something else happening, the Jets should pick up the 5th-year option on Sauce Gardner. They should pick up the 5th-year option on Garrett Wilson. And Jermaine Johnson, they probably should decline the option because the money is guaranteed. And Jermaine Johnson's coming off a serious injury. You might want to see how Jermaine Johnson performs before you commit any additional money to him coming off that Achilles injury. But I think you also have to think longer term, because this is the first year that Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson and Jermaine Johnson and Breece Hall are eligible to sign contract extensions. Players in the NFL become eligible to sign long-term contract extensions after their 3rd season in the league. And if you're looking forward for this Jets team, I think that this is largely the core that you've got, along with a few other players who have shined. Some younger guys who have shined. Quinnen Williams, who's under contract and is now really in the prime of his career, less a young player, more in the prime of his career. Along with a couple of guys who were drafted in 2021. Elijah Vera Tucker, who's now going to be entering the final year of his contract. He will be playing on the 5th-year option, the 5th-year team option. And another guy, Jamian Sherwood, who just had his breakout season, who's about to be hitting free agency. I am of the mindset in the NFL that you're always better off paying your own guys than it is trying to import other teams' players. Now, of course, a timely trade or a timely free agent signing can make a big difference for your team. But I think that if guys show that they can play for your team, that's your core. That's who you should build around. You shouldn't, these are not the guys to pinch pennies with. Yes, of course, like every player has a price. You should not give out exorbitant contracts. You should not pay a penny more than you need to pay. But I think sometimes teams are penny wise and pound foolish, where they draw a line in the sand, a firm line in the sand with guys who fit their locker room well, who fit their team well. They let them leave and they end up needing to pay more money to replace them. I think for the Jets, the first order of business for me would be not just to pick up the 5th-year options of Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson, but it would be to try and work out long-term extensions this offseason, because these are the 2 guys who are genuine stars on this team. Now, I know Sauce Gardner is coming off a disappointing season, but his first 2 seasons were outstanding. And even in what was a disappointing season where his lack of tackling ability was exposed, and that was no surprise. Sauce Gardner, since the second he set foot on an NFL field, has not been a great tackler. He was not terrible in coverage. Now, he wasn't as dominant as he was in 2022 or 2023, but he still had a decent season in coverage. And Garrett Wilson, of course, now 3 seasons in the NFL, 3,000-yard campaigns. These are really your top guys. These are your stars. And in the NFL, I think you build around your stars. And I think both of these guys have earned very lucrative contract extensions. I think another aspect that comes into this is that typically the cap just goes up consistently in the NFL because the cap is based on revenue, and each year revenues rise. Now, it feels like once a decade you have some event that like leads revenues to sink for a year. 2020 that was COVID. There's always like one unforeseen event that leads to like a 1 year decline. But over the long run, salaries always rise, and that means the cap always rises, and that in turn means that the longer you wait on a contract, the more you cost yourself. There's one other aspect to this is I think we know that the Jets' reputation is not great in the league, and that's true in many areas, and it impacts the team in many areas. One of those areas is in this team struggles to sign free agents or convince free agents to come here without taking a big premium. And there's no easy fix for that outside of, winning and rebuilding credibility. But I think the first step is showing the rest of the league that there are guys who are here who still want to be here. That these guys were drafted by this team, and after the experience playing with the Jets, despite the losing, they still want to be here. And that's why I think signing Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson is really important. Then after you have those two, I think you have your second-tier guys. Look, I think Elijah Vera Tucker has proven to be a good player. There's a lot of controversy around this player because of his injury history, but look, he stayed mostly healthy this year and had a very good season. This Jets offensive line is in the best shape it's been in years heading into an offseason. Usually we spend the offseason saying the Jets need to fix their offensive line, and then we spend the offseason after trying to talk ourselves into the players they've signed, and then we get to the fall and the offensive line doesn't play well. This year the offensive line was pretty good, and Elijah Vera Tucker was part of that. And while he has missed big parts of 2 of his 4 seasons, those are not the types of injuries that profile as chronic things that are going to impact him for the long run. He's now locked in at right guard. It doesn't seem like the Jets are, we'll see. Obviously, new coaching staff, new general manager could change things, but seems like, we've established that he's a guard. He shouldn't be moving around. We now have some pretty solid proof on that. Another guy I think you lock up. Now, when you get past him, Jamie Sherwood. I think everybody respects CJ Mosley's role in the locker room. Everybody respects that CJ Mosley's had a great career, but I think it's clearly time to move on from CJ Mosley. It may take a short-term cap hit, but it's just time to move forward. And you move forward with a guy who showed that he could succeed in CJ Mosley's role, a guy who showed that he can handle the linebacker position. You're in good hands with Jamie Sherwood and Quincy Williams at linebacker the next couple of years. And I think you reward a guy. And I think it would be very disappointing. Again, I know new regime. I think it would be very disappointing for the Jets to spend 4 years developing Jamie Sherwood and then letting him walk and letting some other team reap the fruit of those rewards. And then your second-tier guys, I think Jermaine Johnson, you wait to see how he recovers from the injury. You don't want like a Muhammad Wilkerson situation. About a decade ago, Muhammad Wilkerson was a fantastic player for the Jets, but suffered a broken leg at the last game of the 2015 season. The Jets gave him a big contract. He was never the same player. That comes to mind with Jermaine Johnson. But keep an eye on Jermaine Johnson. Early next season, you may want to strike. And then Breece Hall, because of his position, running back, it's not viewed as important a position. And frankly, Breece has not been as good as we hoped he would be, but still a quality player, still a home run threat on offense. I would not stretch as much as I would with Garrett Wilson or Sauce Gardner or even Elijah Vera Tucker or Jamie Sherwood to keep Breece Hall. But if Breece Hall is amenable to a reasonable contract, I would be open to working that out. I think that a lot of the Jets' limited cap space this offseason should be focused on retaining this core so that it's part of this team going forward, and then you can build out from this core. I think the first step of this rebuild is simply maintaining and simply committing to what you've got. And I think that we don't talk enough about that when we discuss the job of the next general manager. Now, head to the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll turn our attention to the most important position on the field, the quarterback position. I think that there's a specific path the Jets should take at this position this offseason. It's not going to be the popular path, but I think it might be the right path. And I'll explain what that path is and why the Jets should take it as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Aren't you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers, no more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to turbotax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at turbotax.com/guarantees. This episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and you might want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to win cash quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions of winnings, it's clear that the people are loving this platform. And here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at Prize Picks. Again, download the app today and use code Locked On NFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON NFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're focused on tasks the next general manager will inherit. The Jets, of course, in the process of interviewing general manager candidates, and they are casting a very wide net in this search. What do the Jets do at the quarterback position? Well, it's partially going to depend on who they pick as their general manager and also who they pick as their next head coach and who they pick as their next play caller. These are all going to impact the specific player the Jets draft. I think there's a specific direction the Jets should look to this offseason. It may not be the popular choice. Now, I think that it's clear Aaron Rodgers is probably not going to be back, and I think it's also clear that that's probably the right decision. This was obviously not a season that worked out for anybody. It was not a great season by any stretch of the imagination for Rodgers. I mean, if you told me before the start of the season that Rodgers would not even break Joe Namath's record of 4,007 passing yards in a season for Jets quarterback, I would have told you it was probably a long season, and that's exactly how it played out. Despite a good final game against Miami, this was just not a season that panned out. If Rodgers returns next year, you're talking about another $37.5 million the Jets will have to pay him, and that's on top of the other concessions they may have to make. Would they have to bring back Allen Lazard? Would they have to bring back Devontae Adams? It's just not a situation that makes sense for anybody, and that doesn't even go into the outsized role Rodgers has had in this organization the last couple of years and all the symbolism behind him. It's clear the Jets need to move forward. So what do the Jets do from here? Well, the unpopular decision, I think, would be to look to the veteran market, and I think that might be the right decision. If you look across the league, there's been kind of a phenomenon the last couple of years, and Jets fans maybe feel this a little bit more because there's been a couple Jets quarterbacks who've been part of this, but disappointing former draft picks, former high draft picks, finding the right place and then kind of succeeding. Obviously, this year with Minnesota and Sam Darnold, a 14-3 record for Sam. You go back to what happened with Seattle a couple of years ago, how Geno Smith took over and developed into a quality starting quarterback. Not as Jets related, but Baker Mayfield, who had a very up and down time with the Cleveland Browns as their first overall pick back in 2018, then went to Carolina for a very unsuccessful season, has found a home in Tampa Bay. And these aren't the only stories. I think that this is kind of a promising direction for the Jets, and there will be guys who are available this offseason who fit that mold. I think that there could be options out there. And I think we also have to ask, why are these quarterbacks succeeding when they get to their second, third stop? And I think there are a couple answers for that. First of all, teams are way too quick to throw these young guys in there who have no idea what they're doing. I mean, if you listen to what a lot of rookie quarterbacks say, they barely know how to read a defense. And in college, they don't face defenses that are doing a ton of complex things. You don't see a lot of defensive linemen drop into coverage. You don't see coverage concepts with as much nuance. So first of all, they're trying to figure out how plays are run, because many of them don't run a lot of pro concepts in college. But even those who don't face defenses that are anywhere near as complex in college. In college, you kind of run what you run. You don't have enough practice time to put in these detailed game plans on a week-to-week basis. You can't really change, and it's true for offense and the defenses you face. You can't really change your scheme to attack specific aspects of what your opponent doesn't do well. So the NFL is a transition, and you're also just going up against better athletes. You're going up against guys who are faster, stronger, bigger, better than anything you've ever faced before. It takes some time to adjust. And frequently these guys are drafted to really bad teams because they're usually high picks, and high picks go to bad teams. So they're thrown into these situations where they don't really have the support. They don't have good coaches. They have coaches who are essentially viewing the quarterback as a meal ticket to save their job. In many cases, they're not giving good offensive linemen. They're not giving great receivers. They're thrown into these really tough spots, and they fail. Then after they get a little bit of experience, maybe they go to a better team, a team that's better equipped to handle their talents, and things start to improve. Now, look at this Jets team. I think about what I said in the first segment, where this Jets actually have a pretty good offensive line for the first time in a while. Jets have a number one receiver in Garrett Wilson. Now, I don't think Devontae Adams is going to be back next year, but Garrett Wilson's a very good guy to start a receiving core with. And in the NFL draft, there are some talented receivers who could be available for the Jets. There also could be some other guys maybe the Jets buy low on this offseason. This actually seems like if you get the right coach in here, which is a non-negotiable for reasons that go beyond the quarterback. But if you get the right coach in here who brings in a good offensive system, maybe the Jets are the next team that can kind of resurrect somebody else's career. And I think about the alternative. The alternative would be drafting somebody. And that's going to be an attractive option for a lot of people because, this is a drafted quarterback hasn't failed yet in the NFL. But sometimes I think we've seen recently in the NFL that, having a few rough seasons isn't necessarily the end of your career. If the Jets draft somebody, I feel like we'll be going down the same road. Now, hopefully you get a good coach in here. Hopefully you have you have Garrett Wilson to build around. You have a good offensive line. So you can say, well, that's a good situation to put a rookie in. The issue I have with that is just where the Jets are as a franchise right now, is that there's going to be so much pressure from the media, and we know how the media impacts ownership, and we know how ownership impacts the team. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to put a rookie quarterback in there before he's ready. Just throw him in there. He'll be the savior of the franchise. He'll get all hyped up. And then nobody will understand when he fails. And it'll be the end of the world, and people will jump on him. I'm not saying the Jets can never draft another rookie quarterback, but I'm saying from where they are right now as a franchise, I would be very hesitant to see them go down this path, because I think that where the Jets are as a franchise right now, the lack of stability, the lack of leadership, it's just going to lead to another situation where you're increasing the odds of failure, because you're increasing the odds that the rookie's going to be forced in there because the Jets need to hype somebody up before he's ready. So I think what we need is a coaching staff to come in and establish itself. Then once the coaching staff has established itself and has some credibility and has established that, they can have some say over things, that, they can do what's best football-wise. A couple of years, maybe we draft a quarterback, maybe a year or two. Now, if a new coaching staff comes in and has great conviction on a prospect, you can talk me into drafting a quarterback. I'm not saying I'm completely ruling it out, but I'm saying where things sit right now on Friday, January 10th, 2025, big picture. And again, this will change when we know exactly who the GM and who the head coach will be. I'd be more willing to go the path of kind of like the reclamation project. I think that that's probably a better path for the Jets, because I actually think they are set up to handle that potentially successfully. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the 2025 season. It's still early. We're still months away from getting the full schedule. The Jets did get a scheduling announcement, and they are going back to a familiar place in 2025. We'll talk about that as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Of course, it was a difficult Jets season, and I know a lot of fans don't want to bet on Jets games. It's too stressful. And even fans who do lay money down on Jets games, they don't want to bet against the Jets. And this year was a very difficult year if you wanted to not bet against the Jets. Well, the Jets are now done for the year. The NFL playoffs are here. It's going to be very exciting. And again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. Again, $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. Let's turn our attention now from the GM search to talk about some scheduling news. Now, this is not a ton of scheduling news, but the Jets did announce that they will be playing a game in London in 2025 once again, and it will be a Jets home game. So this will be the fourth time the Jets play a game in London. Back in 2015, the Jets beat the Miami Dolphins. 2021, they lost to the Atlanta Falcons, and 2024, this past season, they lost to the Minnesota Vikings. a game that was like the last straw for Robert Saleh because Robert Saleh was fired 2 days after this game. Now, this will be a Jets home game. The first 3 times the Jets went to London, it was a road game because you have to, if you just think about this through in a very basic sense, every game that gets moved to London, one of the teams was going to be the home team. And it just so happened that the first 3 times the Jets played in London, they were supposed to be the road team. Now the Jets are losing a home game. So Jets will only have 8 home games, 8 true home games in 2025. They were supposed to have 9. And the way it works in the NFL is that you have a 17-game schedule. So one year you have 8 home games, one year you have 9 home games. And the way the league has worked it out is that in the odd numbered years, the AFC teams get 9 home games and the NFC teams get 8 home games. And then in the even number years, NFC teams get 9 home games and the AFC teams get 8. Well, the Jets will have essentially 8 home games, 8 road games, and a neutral site game in London. So tough break for the Jets, tough break for the fans, but that's the way it goes. I mean, the NFL has expanded these international games. So with so many international games, you have to remember when they started this out, London was doing they were doing one London game a year. So it was really bad luck if your team was chosen and your team had to be the home team. Everybody's eventually going to lose a home game. That's just the NFL's decided that they want to build their business internationally, and a big part of their business plan is to stick games there and put games in front of fans locally in international markets. I think that within our lifetimes, we will see NFL teams in Europe. We'll see probably multiple NFL teams in London and NFL teams in Europe. I think that will eventually happen, and if hopefully we live long enough. But I think it will likely happen within our lifetimes. And part of the NFL's plans to build fans are to put the product in front of them. For some fans, it'll be a good thing. For some fans, it'll mean a trip to London. London's a great one. London's one of my favorite cities. I was actually in London this fall. I spent a weekend there. It was 2 weeks before the Jets played Minnesota. I actually went to a soccer game at that stadium at Tottenham Hotspur. I think it's Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I actually went to see Tottenham Hotspur play, and people asked me, why aren't you staying to see the Jets? And I jokingly said, because I want to enjoy my trip to London. And if I stay to see the Jets, I won't enjoy my trip to London, which probably was prophetic at the time. But I think for some fans, it'll be an exciting trip. For the Jets, we don't know who the Jets' opponent will be. Nobody announced that yet, but the Jets announced that they will be playing a home game in London in 2025. And again, it will be the team's 4th trip across the pond to play a game in the UK and the NFL's international series. Now, the one silver lining for the Jets here is that if you looked at their opponents for 2025, there aren't really any other long trips. In fact, the Jets were scheduled to only play 1 game outside the Eastern time zone in 2025. And that was a road game at New Orleans against the Saints in the Superdome. So, if it was going to happen, this actually is not a bad year for it to happen because there really aren't any other painful road trips. Although, I mean, I don't know how painful these road trips really are in the NFL. You have to remember these guys have luxury accommodations. I don't think it's that big of a deal to get on a plane for a couple hours. And, the hotels, the hotel situation for NFL players isn't terrible. And, for sometimes it can be something that can, especially if it comes in like the heat of the season, if it comes in, during the grind of a long season, it can be an enjoyable trip and an enjoyable way for a team to break things up. Or if a team's struggling, maybe it's a way to get away from things. If that trip had come a little bit later in the season, if the 2024 trip, if the game against the Vikings had come a little bit later in the season, I'm sure a lot of Jets fans would have embraced it because it would have been a chance to get away from it all. Unfortunately, that trip to London for the game against Minnesota was kind of like the middle of the season falling apart for the Jets. It came at a bad time, but depending on when the game comes, it can actually fall at a good point for your team. So we don't know which opponent the Jets will get. You hope it's one of the easier games on the schedule because you don't want to lose a true home game against when it's one of your big games. Hopefully it's one of the games that's relatively easier on the schedule for the Jets. It's a game maybe they won't need the home field advantage at MetLife Stadium for in order to get past their opponent. And it is what it is, though. I mean, it has its pros and cons. If you're able to go to London, it might be a good thing. If you're a season ticket holder who isn't really thrilled with the price, well, it's one less game you have to pay for because the Jets aren't going to charge their season ticket holders for the London game. They're only going to charge them for the MetLife Stadium games. So Jets will be on their way to London in 2025. Teams records 1-2. Maybe they can even it out, get their 2nd win across the pond. And we'll see. We'll find out who the opponent is in the months ahead. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday to talk more Jets.